Hello, this is a journal entry number 2, following the storytelling project part 1 of culture, defining culture. So my definition of culture is basically a very simple breakdown. Is culture is the way a group of people like to think, how people live, think, and do things. It's basically a blueprint of how people act, behave, talk to others. It varies throughout there's hundreds of cultures all over the world. And so the culture I mostly identify with is the Mexican American culture. Both my parents are born and raised in Mexico and came here in the United States to have me. So I grew up with a mix of a Mexican culture and an American culture, but if you were to ask me to break it down into one culture that I mostly associate myself with, I would say it's the Mexican culture. Especially the Veracruz, Oaxaca is where they're from. Their culture, there's like a subculture within that culture, and that's where I mostly identify from because it's all I've ever known. Oop, I just realized my music's on. So question 2, that was question 1. Question 2 is to identify and define each part of Haro's cycle of cultural socialization in the PowerPoint. So the first point he makes is birth, that where our culture, we don't get to choose it. It's just what we're given, because obviously when we're born, we really don't have a say in much. So we're just exposed to whatever we see. We don't really develop a connection to culture until the second point, which is our family. Our family, is our first interactions with the world. So what we get from them is their culture, is what our culture comes from, what we see from them. So what I'm tying into this is my own socialization into the cultural group was the language. So I grew up speaking Spanish, and Spanish was my first language because from birth to the second point, family, all we ever spoke in the house was Spanish. It's very important in our culture to learn the language of our fathers, our mothers, because it's a way to connect and a way to tie us back to the motherland. Step 2, identify step 1, how you came to be. I was just born into the culture. It's, very important. Our culture is very big on family, connections, and relationships. Part 3 is institution, where these are the steps of how one develops their own personal culture. So institution for me would have been school, and in school, speaking Spanish in America, especially in a time growing up where I was a bit back then it was like a problem that needed to be fixed. It needed to be, oh, she needs to learn English or she's gonna fall behind. So my parents saw this and heard this, and they said, all right, well, she's gonna learn English. Y'all won't have a problem with that. She's gonna learn English. So it became, then all of a sudden I was learning a whole new language, and it was hard at first, but as you can see, I mastered it beautifully. Well, I won't say mastered it, but that's, where my language started different levels. Now I spoke more English rather than Spanish. I only spoke Spanish ever at home if I was calling back home in Mexico. So to the fourth point, enforcement, if I have it right here, yes. Enforcement is basically the consequences and or rewards that work consciously with or unconsciously to maintain an existing social system. So, in school, I was very much told to speak more English rather than Spanish. And if I wasn't speaking English with certain teachers, they would get upset. They tell me, that's not the way you're supposed to do it. And if I was, if I did well on a spelling test, I would get, rewards. I'd get praise and all that. So it really made me think, oh yeah, I need to start speaking more English in order to get better positive results towards me. So that's what I would tie enforcement in with my story. So the results, especially nowadays, with everything that's going on in the world right now and everything that's going on in the United States, it's definitely really important for me to stick with my culture. I'm not backing down. This is my life. These are what I'm not what I'm expected to be, but what I want to be. So I think culture is an extremely important thing to have. Multiple cultures mixed together, learning from others will help us learn to be more compassionate, more understanding of others. And action, as we grow conscious of existing social order and how we're positioned and adjusted to it, we can take action through the choices we take. Again, very important, especially nowadays, where we should learn to be more accepting and less closed-minded when it comes to learning about other people and why the way they are, why do they talk that way, why do they act that way, why do they eat, speak, preach that way. That's like super important right now. So, part 3, in the story Howling at the Ocean, surviving my first year teaching by Jadra, sorry. Something I would tell her, let me look at my notes. I would encourage her to be, definitely being culturally competent is super important, especially as a teacher nowadays. Having an understanding of one's own culture and values and social background can really help you connect to others, and being able to respect and learn about them is such an important strength for a teacher. When you're confident in your own cultural background, like when you're sure about it, it can really help you better relate or help someone else be confident or learn about their culture. If you're feeling disconnected, I think she said something about being disconnected from certain students or unsure how to reach them. Cultural competence can help bridge that gap and be able to create a classroom where students feel seen and valued for who they are. It really helps them, instead of making a tier list kind of, that everyone's on the same field. It doesn't matter where they started or where they're from or what language they speak or what God they worship, or if they don't worship one at all. It doesn't matter. That a unique perspective matters, and that embracing one's background, you can bring even more empathy and authenticity into your teaching. So what I would tell is just keep going. Learning is all part of the, not only your students aren't the only ones learning, you yourself are learning. So I think it's super important to have that cultural competence. And then last but not least is my map. So we started here at elementary school with if I remember correctly, having high expectations set for me at such a young age, and it really shaping the rest of my school career. And now we're moving on to here, where journal entry number 2. It's me with, I'm saying hola and then hello with the Mexican and American flag. It's me really like deciding, like embracing both cultures in one. I was never told, oh, you have to be American. I was never Americanized is the word I can think of, because again, I grew up in a Mexican culture, Hispanic culture that really valued it, like really valued oneself, but also really valued learning about other people. So I'm really glad that that's the way I was brought up. And yeah, this is almost around middle school where this was where this idea really started forming, where I really understood it. So that's why it's put there. And yeah, that is the end of my journal entry number 2.